They say the middle of nowhere is peaceful, but that's only if you make it out alive. There are places so far from help, from light, from reason, that when something goes wrong, no one will hear you scream. No signal, no witnesses, just you. And whatever else is out there. It's not always monsters that hide in the woods. Sometimes it's people. Sometimes it's things pretending to be people. The stories you're about to hear aren't campfire tales. They're real. And if you've ever felt watched in the dark, maybe you've already met one of them. Story 1. The Neighbor with Dead Eyes. I had always found comfort in isolation, so when a family friend asked me to dog sit at their place, a house tucked deep in the countryside, hours from the nearest city, I jumped at the chance. Lived in the city now, surrounded by the constant buzz of life, always rushing, never quiet. But the idea of being alone in a home surrounded by woods, fields, and winding gravel roads felt like a mini vacation. 2 big dogs, complete solitude, no distractions. It was exactly what I needed. Terry and Johnny, the homeowners, welcomed me with warm smiles and a brief rundown of the chores. Feeding the dogs, watering a few plants, keeping an eye on the place. Then, just as they were loading their bags into the car, Terry turned to Johnny and said, "Don't forget to tell her about Steve." Johnny gave a nervous chuckle, then explained, "Steve's the neighbor across the road. Harmless guy, drinks too much, talks to himself a bit, but he's got no license, can only ride his moped into town. You'll be fine." He smiled again, but then stopped. "Just in case, here's where we keep the gun." I followed him to a cabinet tucked away in the laundry room. The gun was already loaded. "If you ever need it," he said, "just pull the trigger real hard." The warning was half-hearted, but enough to put a weight in my stomach. Still, I'd grown up in a small town. I'd seen my share of strange neighbors. Besides, I had 2 loyal, trained dogs, protective, obedient, and fierce when needed. I wasn't worried, not yet. The house was remote, yes, but to me, that meant peace, not danger. And as Terry and Johnny drove off into the fading afternoon light, I truly believed I was in for a quiet, uneventful week. That first afternoon was peaceful. I unpacked my things, played with the dogs in the backyard, and took them on a walk through the wooded trail behind the house. They wore themselves out chasing a frisbee, tongues lolling, tails wagging. As the sun dipped lower, casting long golden beams across the gravel drive, I came back inside to finish unloading my car. That's when I heard a door slam across the road, sharp and angry. The dogs froze, ears perked, low growls rumbled from their throats. Then a man's voice, faint, muffled but unmistakably agitated, echoed through the trees. "Where'd you fin go?" he shouted. Another pause, then louder. "I do care about my kids, you be—" A thud followed. Something had been thrown. Later I'd realize it was a phone, skidding along the gravel. The dogs lunged toward, the sound barking with full-throated ferocity. I dropped my bag and spun around, heart jumping into my throat. At the end of the driveway, maybe 70 feet away, stood a man. He didn't move, just stared. His jeans were stained and torn, his hoodie faded and smeared with dirt. He wore a red trucker hat with a Confederate flag emblazoned on the front, and his long, greasy hair clung to the sides of his face. I waved cautiously. "Hey there," I called out, trying to sound calm. "I'm just watching the dogs for Terry and Johnny." Silence. Then, in a low, croaky drawl, he asked, "You all right?" His tone wasn't concerned. It was off, like someone playing at empathy but not quite understanding how to do it. The dogs were still tense, muscles coiled. I smiled politely. "Yeah, I'm good, thanks." Another beat of silence. "How? About yourself?" He didn't answer, just stared. A full 30 seconds passed. Then he repeated, "You all right?" The repetition sent a chill down my spine. Yeah, like I said, I'm fine. Just getting settled. He took a single step forward, boots crunching the gravel. The dogs growled again. I know them dogs, he muttered. They won't do nothing to me. Damn good dogs, though. Something in his voice was wrong, detached. I gave a nervous laugh and began closing my trunk. All right, well, I'm going to head inside. Long drive. As I turned, he snapped. Yeah, what? Loud, sudden, angry. I flinched, heart pounding, but kept walking, calling the dogs in behind me. From the living room window, I saw him still standing there, unmoving, watching the house for 10 full minutes. Not pacing, not talking, just staring. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't just some lonely, awkward drunk. There was something broken behind those eyes, something watching me, not like a neighbor, but like a predator trying to figure out the best way to get in. The rest of that evening felt like walking on a thin sheet of ice. Every creak of the house made my skin crawl. I tried to distract myself, sat on the couch with my headset, played Red Dead Redemption 2 while the dogs curled beside me, but I couldn't fully focus. The sun hadn't completely set when the dogs suddenly bolted toward the back door, snarling, bodies rigid with alert. I froze. They never reacted like that unless someone unknown came too close. I crept to the window, knife in hand, and peered out. At first I saw nothing. Then tail lights, a moped, parked halfway down the driveway, partially obscured behind my car. I leaned closer. Steve was there, crouching beside the vehicle, staring at the house like he was waiting for something. He wasn't moving, not a twitch, just squatting, watching. The dogs growled, but stayed by my side as I crouched behind the curtain, trying to stay unseen. My pulse thudded in my ears. What was he doing? After 5 minutes of this sick game, he stood up and casually circled my car, peeking into the windows, not trying to open anything, just looking, slowly, deliberately. Step, peer, glance at the house. Step, peer, glance. I texted Terry in a panic. She replied almost instantly. Call the cops if you feel unsafe. They know him. Remind me to tell you about the time he stood by the tree at 6 a.m. We think he had a psychotic break. That comforted me in absolutely no way. Still, I told myself maybe he was just drunk. But then, around 8 p.m., the dogs erupted again. This time, when I looked out, Steve was standing on the walkway, only 30 feet from the house, talking to himself, pacing in tight, agitated circles. I turned off all the lights. He stepped forward. 29 feet now. I grabbed the gun. The weight of it was foreign but grounding. One dog flanked me on the left, the other on the right, both in full protective stance. My hands trembled. I dialed 911, explained everything. His behavior, the previous warnings, the alcohol, the gun. The operator asked for my address, then said, I'm sorry, ma'am, you're outside our county. I'll have to transfer you. I was stunned. He lived in their county, but because I didn't, it wasn't their problem. The next dispatcher picked up. While I explained again, I peeked through the kitchen window. Steve had advanced another 40 feet. He was almost at the house now. He's right outside, I whispered. If he gets through that door, I swear to God I'm going to have to shoot him. The dispatcher urged me to turn on all the lights. I hesitated, then flipped the switches. Steve paused, then, without a word, turned, mounted his moped, and vanished into the trees, just as the sound of a distant siren echoed up the gravel road. Too late, but maybe not too late. The police arrived barely a minute after Steve disappeared into the darkness. I met the officer outside, the dogs tense but obedient at my side. I explained everything, his behavior, the trespassing, the threats, the way he stared like he wasn't seeing me but something behind me. The officer listened, arms crossed, then shrugged like this wasn't the first time he'd heard a story like mine. "Yeah," he muttered. I passed him on the road, probably drunk again. He does that sometimes. That was it. No report, no warning, no follow-up. He asked if I planned to stay the night. I told him no. I'd leave the dogs crated and come back in the morning. He waited while I packed, then drove off without another word. The next day I returned with my dad. He walked the perimeter with a deliberate, silent confidence, sending a message. "There's a man here now." From the front window, I saw Steve. Same. Filthy clothes, same vacant stare, standing at the end of the driveway with a case of beer watching us. My father stared back until Steve finally turned and disappeared into his shack. Later, I found out he'd been arrested before, for violence. But it was his eyes I remember most. Empty. Like whatever made him human had long since moved out. Story 2. Into the Canyon with a Stranger. Back in 2009, I was working as a wildland firefighter on an engine crew based out of Southern California. I was 20 at the time, assigned to a unit with a solid team, Corey, our level-headed 23-year-old. Crew member, Amy, another 20-year-old like me, and our captain and driver who stayed behind with the truck. We were stationed near Glendale during one of the worst wildfire seasons in years. Mansions loomed on dry hillsides, and the tension in the air was always thick with heat and smoke. One afternoon, while we were on standby near a residential zone, a civilian approached our rig. He looked harmless enough, middle-aged, tanned, carrying a large plastic jug of water in one hand, and talking rapidly about seeing smoke in a dried-out riverbed just below the nearby canyon trail. As the closest available team, we were dispatched to check it out. The man insisted he could show us exactly where it was. It seemed a little strange, but we weren't about to ignore a potential threat during fire season. We grabbed our gear and followed him through the dry brush, boots crunching against the dusty earth. He moved fast, talking non-stop about smoke, fire danger, and oddly how he needed to grab his camelback before going further. I noticed the jug he carried wasn't even half full, and the so-called camelback had no hose, just an empty shell strapped across his back. Still, we pushed on. It was California in August, and time was critical. As we neared the ravine, he stopped and pointed to a rope dangling over the edge. "We'll need to rappel down," he said with a grin. Something about his tone wasn't right. But we were young, dutiful, and too trusting. So we clipped in and descended, blind to what we were walking into. The descent into the ravine was steeper than we'd expected. As our boots hit the dusty riverbed below, we realized we were in a sunken stretch of dry stream, flanked by 15-foot-high banks. There was no easy way back up. Once you dropped in, the only option was to walk several miles along the riverbed to circle back out. Our guide seemed energized by our hesitance. He bounced ahead of us, talking rapidly and erratically, his words zigzagging from fire hazards to photography to childhood memories that felt far too personal. He had a camera around his neck, the kind you'd expect a tourist to carry, and he kept fiddling with it while he walked. That's when he suddenly stopped, turned to me and said, "You know, you look just like my daughter's friend from middle school. She used to come over all the time. Then one day she just stopped." His stare lingered too long. A chill ran up my spine. "You really do look like her," he said again. "Can I get a picture?" I forced a polite laugh and suggested a group photo instead. Corey stepped in quickly, sensing the change in tone. "Group only," he said firmly. "No solo shots." The man reluctantly agreed, but his attention never left me. As we walked deeper into the canyon, we passed a series of old check dams. Concrete drop-offs with rusted ladders leading from one level to the next. Each time we climbed down, the man insisted on helping Amy and me, placing his hands a little too low, a little too long. Corey started going down first after that, shielding us. Still, the guy never stopped talking. He rambled about caves, about bunnies, about how cool it would be to get a few photos of lady firefighters in action. He winked more than once, and every time my stomach clenched tighter. At Dam 3, Corey pulled me aside and whispered, "This guy gives me a seriously bad feeling. Stay close." I didn't need convincing. We were stuck down here, no radio signal, no backup, and no way out but forward. Every step we took, I could feel the canyon walls pressing in, and the man's presence behind us growing heavier by the minute. By the time we reached the 5th dam, the trail had gone from unsettling to downright ominous. The canyon narrowed, the air felt heavier, and the man's demeanor shifted. He became more insistent, more urgent, eyes darting, voice louder, like he couldn't contain the excitement bubbling just beneath the surface. "There's a cave just up this way," he said, gesturing to a side path that split off from the riverbed. "It's not where the smoke was, but you have to see it. It's incredible. You're gonna love it." His smile was too wide, his teeth clenched too tight. Corey, ever the calm one, asked flatly, "Is this where you said you saw the smoke?" The man waved him off. "Nah, but who cares? There's no fire. But this cave, it's something else." Then, without warning, he looked directly at me and said, "Come on, Michelle. I know you remember it. We used to have so much fun." My name isn't Michelle. My blood went cold. Amy's face drained of color. Corey stepped forward, placing himself squarely between us. "We're not going into any damn cave," he said. "We're turning back." But the guy didn't move. He just stood there, breathing heavily, gripping the strap of his useless camelback, eyes flickering with something unstable. Then he started mumbling, something about bunnies again, about wanting to photograph us playing in the dark. That's when we heard it. Radio chatter, faint but clear, echoing down the canyon. It wasn't our crew, but another engine. Team on a nearby channel, bouncing through a repeater. The guy didn't know that. We took our chance. Corey clicked his mic and started talking like someone was giving him instructions, pretending to acknowledge an urgent call from base. We spun around, practically jogging back the way we came. The man didn't follow at first, just stood there watching us go. But when we looked back from the 4th dam, he was still in view, shadowed by the canyon walls, watching, still smiling. Even after we called our truck to meet us at the next opening, even after we climbed out, he lingered. When the engine arrived, he vanished without a word, just gone. We never did find that cave, but even if we had, I'm certain it wouldn't have been empty. Back at the truck, none of us spoke for a while. The adrenaline was still pulsing through our veins, and the heat of the day now felt smothering. As we sat on the tailgate drinking warm water, trying to steady our nerves, Corey kept glancing back down the trail, as if expecting that man to emerge from the canyon with that same eerie smile and camera in hand. He never did. We reported the encounter to our captain, gave a vague description, but there was little anyone could do. We didn't know his name. No crime had technically been committed, just a series of wrong words and subtle touches, but all of us knew, deep down, that if we'd gone into that cave, something terrible might have happened. The way he called me Michelle, the way he touched Amy's back, the way he talked about bunnies, it didn't feel like coincidence. It felt like we'd almost stepped into a memory he was trying to recreate, and this time, with no witnesses. I still think about that man sometimes, about what might be waiting in that canyon for the next group naive enough to follow, because I don't think he was there by chance. I think he was waiting. Story 3. The Word on the Shelter Wall. A couple summers ago, my girlfriend and I took what we thought would be a quiet camping trip in northern Wisconsin. We're both from Chicago, and the noise, the crowds, the constant motion of city, life had been wearing us down. We wanted silence, trees, space, and more than anything, we wanted to be alone. So we picked a remote section of the North Country Trail, a national scenic route that stretches across the northern part of the US, but gets almost no traffic in certain areas. This particular stretch was only accessible via winding logging, thoroughroads, unpaved, narrow, and entirely surrounded by dense forest. Perfect. We planned to hike about 15 miles in, stay overnight at one of the primitive backpacker shelters, then hike back out the next day. It wasn't our first backcountry trip, but it was by far the most isolated. When we arrived at the trailhead, there were no other cars, no signs of recent hikers, just the crunch of gravel beneath our boots and the occasional distant bird call. It was exactly what we wanted, until it wasn't. After a long day of hiking, we reached the shelter, pitched our tent in a small clearing behind it, and settled in by the fire. The air was cool, crisp, and perfectly still. We passed a pouch of wine back and forth, listened to the forest settle in for the night, and marveled at how many stars you could see when no one else was around. That night, we crawled into our tent full of peace and exhaustion, believing we were completely alone out there. We were wrong. What started as a peaceful escape would soon turn into one of the most unnerving nights of our lives. I'm not exactly sure when I fell asleep that night, but I remember the sound that woke me up. It was dull, rhythmic, like two logs being knocked together, slow and deliberate. Thunk, pause, thunk. My girlfriend stirred beside me. Her eyes were already open. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. I nodded, holding my breath, trying to determine where it was coming from. It didn't sound close, but it didn't sound far either. Just beyond the clearing, maybe, near the shelter. Our tent had no windows, only a mesh vent at the top, so we couldn't see anything. We lay there, frozen, listening. The noise continued. Knock, knock, knock. It wasn't the rustle of an animal or the fumbling of raccoons in a food bag. It was intentional, human. My first thought was that someone was messing with us, another hiker, maybe drunk, maybe lost. But there had been no one else on the trail, no other vehicles at the trailhead. The North Country Trail in this section is almost never used. The odds of someone else being out here, unannounced, were slim. And yet someone or something was knocking. Then the sound stopped. We waited in silence, adrenaline sharp in our veins. But what came next was worse. Voices, low, muffled. 2, maybe 3 people, speaking in tones just low enough that we couldn't make out the words. My girlfriend clutched my arm. I reached for the flashlight but didn't turn it on. I didn't want to draw attention. We lay still, hoping whoever was out there didn't notice the tent. After a few minutes, the voices faded, but we didn't. Sleep. Not a second. I could feel every second of the night dragging by like it was resisting the dawn. When the first light finally crept in, we were still frozen, staring at the nylon ceiling. The forest around us looked unchanged, still and green and serene, but it had betrayed us. It was no longer peaceful. It had become a mask, hiding something that had walked the trail with us in the dark. When we finally stepped out of the tent at dawn, the forest was still and bathed in a pale golden light that made the previous night feel almost dreamlike. Almost. But as we crept back toward the main shelter to retrieve our food bag and trash, reality came crashing back fast. My girlfriend was the first to see it. She froze in place, let out a sharp gasp, and pointed at the wooden wall beside the shelter entrance. Carved into the wood freshly, like it had been done just hours ago, was the word "kill." The letters were deep and jagged, uneven as if hacked in with a dull blade or knife. Below it, dozens of smaller slashes marred the surface. Random. Erratic gashes, like someone had lost patience or wanted to destroy the wall entirely. Wood splinters still littered the ground beneath it, pale and clean, clearly untouched by dew or dirt. These weren't old marks. Someone had been standing there, steps from where we slept, carving that message in the dark. My stomach turned. We looked around in all directions, scanning the tree line, half expecting someone to be watching us even now. The peace of the forest was gone, replaced by a suffocating awareness that we had been observed, hunted even. We didn't speak as we packed up our gear. Every zipper, every snapped buckle felt thunderously loud in the morning stillness. We didn't eat. We didn't rest. Just rolled up the tent, shouldered our packs, and began the 15-mile hike. Back at a near jog. I kept looking over my shoulder, sure that we'd see movement in the trees. Every snapping twig made my heart lurch, but we saw no one. It wasn't until we returned to the trailhead, drenched in sweat and half delirious, from fear and exertion, that we noticed the final sign. Blood smeared across our windshield. A squirrel carcass had been skewered onto the wiper blade, its insides leaking down the glass, matted fur clinging to the hood. We didn't speak. I simply unlocked the doors, shoved our gear into the trunk, and drove until the woods were nothing, more than a green blur in the rearview mirror. We didn't stop until we reached Milwaukee, not for food, not for gas. We drove in silence, the squirrel's blood drying into a crusty smear across the windshield, until we finally pulled into a gas station and scraped it off with a wad of newspaper. Neither of us wanted to talk about it. Not then, not for days. But the fear lingered like a stain that wouldn't wash out. We told a few close friends, but no one really knew what to say. There was no suspect, no explanation, no rational reason for what happened out there. Just a carved threat, violent markings, and a mutilated animal left as a message. Some people tried to laugh it off. Probably just kids messing around, they said. But kids don't hike 15 miles into a remote section of trail and silently stalk strangers through the night. They don't leave behind words etched in violence. Whoever it was, they had planned it. They watched us. They waited. And they were close. Uncomfortably close. We never went back to that section of the trail, and we don't plan to. Because now we know when you think you're alone out there in the woods, you're probably not. Someone's always watching. Story 4. The Man in the Monkey Mask. Back when I was around 18 or 19, I lived in California near a stretch of forest with a creek running through it. It wasn't exactly wilderness, more like a patch of forgotten green wedged between suburbs and industrial space, but it was ours. My older brothers, a few friends, and I used to spend hours exploring it, always on the lookout for something weird, something left behind. Our favorite spot was an old storm drain that emptied into the creek, with two large tunnels standing side by side, each about 9 feet high. Inside, concrete pillars rose out of the ground like the bones of some lost temple, and the way the tunnels converged deeper inside only added to the thrill. We spent countless afternoons there, skating, talking, pretending we were discovering a secret world beneath our own. On the day everything changed, 4 of us had met up to explore again, me and my friends N, J, and G. There were 2 parking lots on opposite ends of the forest, and we arrived in 2 separate cars. The plan was simple. Hang out, walk the drain, maybe take some photos. We were older now, not kids anymore, but there was something about going back to that place that made us feel young again. Nostalgic. Untouchable. As we made our way through, the trees laughing and shoving each other, we had no idea we were about to encounter someone or something that didn't belong there. Not like we did. Something that would turn our little hideaway into a place we'd never see the same way again. We weren't deep in the forest when it started, but we were deep enough that no one would hear us if we screamed. The sun was already dipping behind the treetops as we made our way to the storm drain entrance, the golden light filtering through the canopy like stained glass. The tunnels were just as we remembered, massive, damp, echoing with each step. We climbed up the steep incline toward the upper chamber, but it was flooded from recent rains, so we decided to turn back. That's when things began to feel wrong. As we exited the tunnel, N grabbed my arm and motioned toward the tree line. "There's a guy out there," he whispered. his voice tight. "He's wearing a monkey mask." At first I thought he was joking. Something about the absurdity of it didn't compute. But then I saw him too. A large man, tall and broad, wearing tattered clothes and a full rubber monkey mask that covered his entire head. He was pushing a beat-up bike along the dirt path, not acknowledging us at all. Just existing there as if we were invisible. We were maybe 15 feet away, close enough to see the dirt caked on his jeans and the unnatural shine of that rubber face. The mask's grin didn't move, but somehow it felt like it was watching us. Then he began picking up random things from the ground, sticks, wrappers, rocks, and putting them into a small cloth sack. He still hadn't looked at us. G and J, visibly freaked out, turned back toward the parking lot, but N and I stayed, drawn by a mix of curiosity and unease. We moved further uphill to get a better vantage point and lost sight of him for a moment. That's when we heard it, the sharp rustling of leaves. From the brush below he emerged again, quickly, almost deliberately, standing dead still in the middle of the trail. For 5 seconds he didn't move. Then, without warning, he grabbed his bike and began walking in the direction J and G had gone, fast. Not running, but faster than before. His posture had changed. Purposeful. Intent. N immediately called them, urging them to get to the car. "He's coming your way," he said, eyes wide. "And he's not just walking anymore. He's following." N and I didn't wait to see where the monkey-masked man was going. We turned and started heading toward the other parking lot on the far side of the forest, our phones gripped tightly, flashlights already on as the daylight faded fast. The woods were closing in with each step, shadows stretching long and strange, and the deeper we went, the louder everything felt, our breathing, the crunch of leaves, the brittle snap of every broken twig beneath our boots. We kept glancing back, half expecting him to be there, following in silence, but we saw nothing. And then we heard screaming. Not words, not human panic. These were primal, guttural sounds, like people imitating animal calls at full volume. Howls, shrieks, barks, some close, some farther off. The forest came alive with chaos. We stopped in our tracks, spinning in all directions, trying to locate where the noises were coming from, but there were no figures, no movement, just noise, relentless and echoing like a ritual gone wrong. It felt like we were being hunted by something we couldn't see. The screams followed us as we broke into a run, ducking through low branches, stumbling over roots, the flashlight beams bouncing wildly. The closer we got to the parking lot, the more distant the screams became, until, like a switch had been flipped, they stopped completely. Just dead silence. When we reached the clearing, G and J were already there, faces pale, doors open, engine running. We jumped in, breathless. G sped off, the car jolting on the uneven path. We thought that was it. But when we returned to retrieve N's car from the opposite lot, there were no other vehicles around, no sign of the man, no explanation. Days later, we heard from another friend who'd visited the forest that a cop once warned him and his group to leave, because apparently the monks from a nearby hidden temple didn't like people in the woods after dark. According to him, one of the monks had even spoken from the trees telling the cop to go. We laughed it off mostly, but every time I think about that man in the monkey mask and those unearthly screams echoing through the forest, I wonder if what we stumbled into that night was more than just weird. Maybe it was sacred, or maybe it wasn't meant to be seen at all. Months later, after we had all returned to our routines and tried to chalk the whole thing up to one strange, inexplicable night, N and I decided to go back. Curiosity had gotten the better of us. We wanted answers, or at least something tangible to help us understand what we'd seen. We took a different route this time, climbing a steep hill that led to the edge of the property where the supposed temple sat. It was eerily quiet. No cars, no movement. A few doors hung open, swaying slightly in the wind, but we saw no people. Just as we were about to leave, we were approached by three strangers, a man, a woman, and a young woman around our age. They said they were lost, trying to find the trail and the parking lot. But something about them felt off. They'd come from the wrong direction, through an area with no path, no visible entry. We walked them to the road, gave them directions, and watched them go. A few minutes later we followed, but they were gone, vanished. No footprints, no vehicles, just trees and silence. I still don't know what we encountered that night or who, but I'm not sure I want to. Story 5. The Van in the Nowhere Town. It happened in my early 20s, back when I was still trying to figure out who I was and how to navigate the messy transition into adulthood. A close friend of mine had a complicated relationship with her father, a man who could be charming in public, but turned into a cruel, unpredictable drunk behind closed doors. He lived in a tiny coastal town, the kind of place with more boarded-up windows than streetlights. Every once in a while, my friend would get the idea to reconnect, and I'd go with her, more out of concern than curiosity. On one particular visit, the usual storm of alcohol and repressed anger boiled over faster than usual. A shouting match exploded into full-blown chaos, and just after midnight, he kicked us out, literally shoved us out the door. We didn't have a car. Someone had dropped us off earlier, and the house was about 4 kilometers outside of town, connected only by a winding dirt road with no lights and no traffic. We started walking, my friend still sobbing, slurring. Half-coherent curses into the night air. There was no cell phone reception, and back then we didn't carry smartphones anyway. The only place to make a call was the ancient telephone booth outside the gas station in town, which is where we finally collapsed, exhausted and shivering, beneath the sickly orange glow of a flickering street lamp. I used the payphone to wake my parents, who agreed to make the hour-and-a-half drive to pick us up. My friend slumped on the bench beside me, still sniffling, while I tried to stay alert and present. That's when I saw it, a white van slowing as it approached, then stopping directly behind us. The engine idled, the headlights stayed on, and no one got out. At first, I told myself it was nothing, just some guys stopping to check directions, maybe waiting for someone. But something about the way they sat there unmoving, windows tinted and headlights glaring, made my skin crawl. My friend hadn't noticed yet. She was still wrapped in the spiral of her own grief. I couldn't stop staring. Slowly the van door slid open, revealing not just the 2 men in the front seats, but a handful of others crammed into the back. I counted at least 5, maybe more. All young, all male. They didn't get out, they just watched us. A few of them began talking, quietly at first, but then louder. Just loud enough that I could catch pieces of what they were saying. We should pull them in. Bet they'd scream. Take them somewhere no one finds them. My stomach dropped. I was paralyzed, not just with fear, but with disbelief. This wasn't a movie. This wasn't a warning story your parents told. This was real. My friend kept crying, oblivious, and I couldn't even find my voice to warn her. Then one of them, tan skin, dead eyes, expressionless, locked eyes with me. He was sitting in the sliding doorway, legs hanging out, arms resting on his knees like he had all the time in the world. He never blinked, never smiled, just stared at me like I was a thing. Prey. I was shaking so hard I thought I might pass out. Just as I opened my mouth to speak, a car's headlights appeared down the road. The van didn't move. The car passed. Still the van didn't move. That's when, impossibly, my friend's father's car pulled up behind them. The man who'd just screamed us out of his life hours earlier had come back. He was drunk, slurring, and still furious, but for that one surreal moment he was the only thing standing between us, and whatever those men had in mind. The van grew quiet. The door slid shut. They didn't drive away. Not yet. They simply watched as if weighing their chances, and then slowly they started to follow us. My friend's dad didn't ask questions. He didn't apologize, he barely looked at us. But he told us to get in the car, and we did, immediately. I kept my eyes on the van as we pulled away. It hesitated, then started moving behind us. Slowly, at first, then matching our speed. When we turned onto the dirt road toward his house, they followed, headlights still glaring in the rearview mirror. I tried to explain what had happened, about the things they said, the way they looked at us, but he just grunted and muttered something about crazy kids and told me not to worry. But I was worried. We all were. The van didn't just follow us into town. It followed us down the winding, unlit road to his house. It pulled into the driveway behind us and parked. No one got out. For a moment, none of us moved. We sat there in the parked car, the engine running. 3 people trapped in the bubble of the interior, while half a dozen strangers waited in the dark, just feet away. My friend's dad finally killed the engine and lit a cigarette with shaking hands. "They'll leave," he said, but they didn't. Minutes passed, then 10, then 20. Still, the van idled in the dark like a predator deciding whether to pounce. The neighborhood was deserted, mostly vacation homes, empty and silent. No lights on in the windows, no neighbors to call. If they had chosen to get out to act on the threats they whispered before, we would have had no help. I was sweating, gripping the door handle, trying to think of what I could use as a weapon. My friend had gone completely silent. Her tears dried into wide, frozen eyes. Just as suddenly as they had arrived, the van's engine revved. It backed slowly down the driveway, turned, and disappeared into the night. We didn't celebrate. We didn't even speak, because the fear hadn't left. It had only retreated. Whatever those men were, whatever they had planned, they had been close. Far too close. And the silence they left behind was louder than anything they could have said. My parents arrived an hour later, panicked after not finding us where we'd said we'd be. We didn't explain much that night, just that something had happened, something bad. I remember the look on my dad's face when he saw how pale I was, how quiet we both had gone. My friend's father didn't say a word. He disappeared into the house the moment we left, never looking back. Maybe he was ashamed. Maybe he was just too drunk to care. I've been asked over the years if I reported it. The truth is, I don't remember. Everything about that night exists in my mind like a fever dream, fragmented, surreal, sharp in moments but blurred in others. What I do remember, and what stayed with me all this time, is the face of the man sitting in the van's doorway. His eyes were empty, utterly blank, as if there was no person behind them, just a purpose. That experience changed me. I became more fearful, more guarded. I hover over my kids now, probably more than I should, but I don't plan to stop, because I've looked into the eyes of someone who wanted to hurt me just for existing, and I won't forget it. Story 6. Come on, it's Daddy. I was 7 years old when my father took my older brother and me on a week-long vacation to a remote cabin deep in the woods. It was supposed to be a special trip, just the 3 of us, a break from the noise of everyday life. The cabin was small but cozy, perched on the edge of thick, silent forest land that seemed to stretch forever. My brother and I each had our own room upstairs. Mine faced the woods with a big window directly next to my bed. The tree just outside had thick, climbable branches, and I remembered trying to scale it earlier that day before giving up. There were no blinds, just a wide pane of glass that let in moonlight and shadows. At that age I loved comic books, so when I couldn't fall asleep that night, homesick and a little uneasy, I pulled out a flashlight and started reading under the covers. The cat we'd brought along curled up next to me, purring, and I started to settle in. Outside, the wind rustled the trees gently, nothing unusual for a night like that. But then, just past 2 a.m., I heard something that froze me completely. A soft tapping on the window, tap, 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 followed by a low whisper. I thought it might have been the tree until I heard it again. "Open up, son, it's Daddy, let me in." The voice was too calm, too familiar. My father was asleep in the next room. "Luke, it's cold out here." Then a pause. "Come on." "It's Daddy, I just want to cuddle." My blood ran cold. I knew somehow that whoever or whatever was outside that glass wasn't my dad, and that if I turned to look, it would already be watching me. I didn't move. My body felt frozen, every muscle locked in place as though the weight of the voice outside had paralyzed me. I lay curled in bed, back to the window, flashlight still on, but pointed into the covers. My cat, who had been dozing beside me just seconds before, now stood on all fours, tail puffed, ears flat, hissing into the darkness. That was when the whisper came again, closer, louder. "Luke, buddy, come on, don't ignore your dad." There was a strange rhythm to the voice. It didn't sound natural, it sounded practiced, like someone trying to mimic kindness, but missing the mark entirely. I pressed my face into the cat's fur, too terrified to scream, too young to make sense of what was happening. Then I heard it again, tap, 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 followed by a light scraping as if fingernails were dragging along the glass. My skin prickled. "Let me in," the voice said, quieter now, almost cooing. "It's cold out here." And then, "I just want to hold you." That line broke something in me. My chest clenched, and I felt the sting of tears. I knew my dad would never say that like that. Never from outside, never in that voice. I wanted to scream, but my throat wouldn't open. I just lay there, clutching the blanket, shaking. That's when the sound changed. A sharp screeching noise began, like metal against glass. I finally turned against every instinct and saw him. A man standing at the window, grinning ear to ear with an expression that didn't belong on a human face. His teeth were too wide, too visible, and his eyes were filled with something between hatred and hunger. In one hand, he held a small pocket knife, dragging it in long, deliberate strokes across the window pane, the metal screeching like it was trying to carve its way through the glass and into my mind. My cat let out a guttural growl and lunged toward the window, clawing at the air. That was the moment I found my voice. I screamed louder than I ever had in my life, and that scream was the only thing that broke the spell. The scream tore through the silence like a flare in the dark, and almost immediately I heard the thunder of footsteps rushing up the stairs. The man outside, if he even was a man, snapped his head toward the sound with that hideous grin still stretched across his face, but now his eyes had widened, wild and hateful. Then he dropped out of view. My bedroom door burst open and my father came in like a storm, still pulling on a flannel shirt, his hunting rifle already in hand. My older brother was right behind him, eyes wide with confusion and fear. "What happened?" my dad barked. I pointed at the window, still shaking, voice barely a whisper. Someone was there." Without hesitation, my father ran to the window, looked out, then bolted down the stairs and out the back door. I sat up, my legs like rubber, heart hammering. My brother hugged me tightly while I clung to our cat, who still hissed in the direction of the window. We waited. 5 minutes passed, then 10. My dad came back in, breathless, face grim. "He's gone," he said. "Whoever it was, they dropped down from the roof." The window was on the second floor. I stared at him, trying to understand. "He was standing key on the tree," he muttered. "That one outside your window." My mind reeled. I had tried to climb that tree earlier that day and failed. How had some grown man, gotten up there in the dark? My father stayed. Up the rest of the night, sitting by the front door with the rifle across his lap, while my brother slept beside me in the room. But I didn't sleep. I couldn't. That grin haunted me every time I closed my eyes. In the morning, police arrived, and we filed a report. They searched the woods and found only a few scuffed boot prints near the base of the tree, and nothing else. No knife, no face, no answers, just the memory of a voice that still echoed in my head. Come on, it's Daddy. But I know now, with every part of me, that it never was. They never caught him. The police treated it like a disturbed transient, or a would-be burglar, but even as a child I knew it was something worse, something intentional. That man didn't come to rob us. He didn't try to break in. He stood on a tree branch outside a second-story window, in the dead of night, mimicking my father's voice, asking to be let in, not forcing his way, but pretending, luring. It's that part that still unsettles me most, the way he tried to make himself familiar, the way he waited. He wanted to be invited. For years after, I couldn't sleep without blinds on my windows. Even now, as an adult, I avoid houses with second-story bedrooms facing the woods. The cabin trip was cut short. We left the next morning and never went back. My dad replaced that window with one that didn't open, and I never slept in that room again. But what stayed with me most wasn't the window or the knife or even that grotesque grin. It was the cat. He never left my side that night. He turns 14 this week, still feisty, still protective. And every now and then, when he stares too long into a dark corner, I still wonder what he remembers. Story 7. The Highway Game. It was supposed to be one of those unforgettable summer nights, the kind that leaves you sore from dancing and laughing. I was 18, and a group of my girlfriends and I had just spent the day at Warped Tour at the Gorge Amphitheater in Grant County, Washington. If you've ever been there, you know it's stunning. Carved out of the cliffs overlooking the river, but also tucked far, far away from everything else. By the time we piled into the car around 9 p.m., we were sunburned, exhausted, and still, giddy from the music. The highway out of the gorge was pitch black, lined with trees and empty farmland, with no streetlights and barely any other drivers in sight. Just us and the occasional distant headlights. We joked, sang, and passed snacks around. None of us were really paying attention to the road until we noticed a white car speeding up behind us, its headlights too bright, its presence too aggressive. The driver in our group switched lanes to let it pass, and it did, quickly. But instead of continuing ahead, the car slowed down again, then slower and slower, until it was doing under the speed limit just ahead of us. At first it seemed odd. Then it started to feel deliberate. We chalked it up to some bad driver. But we were about to find out that this wasn't someone being careless. This was someone playing a game we were never supposed to be part of. And on that long, unlit stretch of Washington Highway, with no signal and nowhere to run, it was about to become deadly serious. At first, we tried to laugh it off. Maybe they're just lost, someone offered, or maybe they're texting. But the laughter faded fast. The car in front of us, that same white sedan, was now crawling along at 35 mph on a 55 mph stretch of highway. Our driver tried to pass again, but as we changed lanes, so did they, perfectly timed, cutting us off. We fell back. They slowed down even more, then stopped, right there in the middle of the road. For a few tense seconds, our car idled behind them, headlights illuminating the dust kicked up from their tires. No one moved. No one got out. They just sat there. We couldn't see through their tinted windows, but we knew they were watching us. Our driver backed up and switched lanes. The car didn't move until we started accelerating again. and then it surged forward, matching our speed exactly. When we slowed, they slowed. When we sped up, so did they. They stayed parallel with us, lane for lane, second for second. At some point, one of us began crying softly in the back seat. The situation had become surreal but too precise to be random. Another car eventually appeared in the distance, coming up fast behind us, and for a moment we felt relief. Someone else. Someone who could help. But the white car didn't flinch. It just drifted back behind us and hovered in our blind spot, like a shadow as the other vehicle passed. We tried to fall in line behind that car, using it as a shield, but the white sedan sped up again, weaving, to block us. That's when it became clear we weren't being messed with, we were being hunted. Our phones had no signal, and every turn we considered was just more forest or farmland. No side roads, no exits, no lights, just us and that car. We didn't know what they wanted, if it was a prank or something worse, but we all felt the same thing deep in our stomachs. If they forced us to stop, we weren't going to get back on the road again. The road stretched on, black and endless, while the white car played its game, never quite overtaking us but never falling behind for long. Our driver was gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles were white, eyes flicking from mirror to mirror in growing panic. None of us were talking anymore. There was nothing to say. We were trapped in some unspoken nightmare, and no one wanted to be the first to admit how scared we really were. The car ahead would brake suddenly, then accelerate. It weaved, hovered, surged forward, only to slam its brakes again. Twice we thought they were going to force us off the road. The second time they came so close that we heard the screech of our tires as we swerved to avoid them. Our car jolted violently, and the backseat girl screamed. We had no signal, no weapons, and no real plan. One friend suggested ramming them, but our driver said no. If we provoked them, we might make it worse. Then we saw it. A rest area turnoff just ahead, barely visible in the dark. Without saying a word, our driver made a split-second decision and cut hard onto the gravel access lane, headlights off, driving deep into the pull-off until we were nestled between two large semis. She killed the lights and engine. We sat in absolute silence, heartbeats, breath, nothing else. A few minutes passed, then we saw the white car fly by on the highway, fast, too fast. It didn't slow down. It didn't turn around. It just kept going. We waited. 10 minutes, 15. Then, headlights again. Another semi. We pulled out and merged directly in front of it, using its bulk as cover. As we passed back onto the highway, we saw it. The white car, now ahead of us again, creeping, along like it had never left. But this time it didn't slow when we approached with the semi behind us. It sped up, disappeared, gone like smoke. None of us spoke until we saw the first town lights glimmering on the horizon, and even then, no one dared look behind us. Reported. It partly because we didn't have a license plate, but mostly because we didn't know what to say. A car chased us didn't seem enough. Was it a prank? A gang initiation? Something darker? None of us had answers, only theories. But the fear was real, that cold, calculated pursuit, the way they matched our every move. It wasn't road rage, it wasn't random. It was a game someone else started, and we were the unwilling players. After that night, I avoided driving at night for years. Even now, if I see a car hanging just a little too long in my rearview mirror, I tense up. I still think about how quiet they were, how they never rolled down a window, never showed their faces. Just a car full of strangers choosing us for reasons we'll never understand. We were lucky. That's what everyone says when I tell the story, lucky. But luck implies you survive by chance. And the truth is, that night we only survived because of a rest stop, a hasty decision, and a trucker who never knew he saved our lives. Story 8. The Woman at the Window. For a year and a half, I worked as a live-in caretaker for a 94-year-old woman named Marie who had late-stage Alzheimer's. She had recently moved into her daughter's home, a modest, aging house tucked deep in the woods of rural Washington. It was beautiful in the way only true isolation can be. No neighbors for miles, no cell service, and only a single unpaved road leading in or out. In the beginning, I welcomed the peace. I'd been working in elder care for years, so I was used to strange behaviors, confusion, hallucinations, the way memory and time could slip through someone's fingers like water. Marie was sweet most of the time, prone to smiling at things that weren't there and whispering names long buried. But there was something different about this house, about the woods. Marie hated them. She would talk about the animals out there, the danger, the shadows. She warned me not to go outside after dark, always speaking with a kind of fearful reverence. Sometimes she'd mention her mother or her husband, both long deceased, being out there in the trees, traveling through the woods to get back to her. I chalked it up to the disease. But then she started waking in the middle of the night, walking barefoot to the same window, giggling and waving to someone only she could see. And little by little, her laughter began to sound less like joy and more like terror in disguise. At first, I treated Marie's nighttime behavior as just another symptom. Sundowning is common in people with Alzheimer's, confusion and agitation as the sun goes down, often leading to wandering or restlessness. But something about the way she returned to that same window night after night began to gnaw at me. It was always around the same hour, sometime between 2 and 3 in the morning, when the house would go deathly still and Marie's bare footsteps would echo down the hallway like soft taps on a coffin lid. I'd find her standing in front of the window, giggling softly, waving. "It's Mama," she'd whisper, eyes glassy. "She's waiting for me." Sometimes she'd ask me to open the window to let them in. I'd gently guide her back to bed, tuck her in, and try to convince myself it was harmless. Just her mind replaying old memories in a loop. But then, one winter night, the alarm system blared at full volume, waking both me and Marie's daughter. We bolted from our rooms thinking someone had broken in. Every door was locked, every window shut. The only thing missing was Marie. She was gone. We searched the entire house. Nothing. Panic bloomed in my chest as I grabbed a flashlight and ran into the snowy yard, shouting her name. And that's when I saw her, standing motionless just outside the window she always visited, barefoot in the snow in her thin nightgown, smiling as if basking in moonlight. But there were no footprints around her. Not a single one. And she wasn't cold, not shivering, not blue, just standing, smiling. When I brought her back inside, she didn't even seem confused. She just said, "I told you she was waiting." After that, the giggling stopped. It was replaced with growling, moaning, even screaming. Some nights she would claw at the glass, yelling at shadows I couldn't see. Then, one night, she simply stopped going to the window, as if whatever had been calling her no longer needed her to come closer. The silence that followed Marie's final window visit was more unnerving than the laughter or screams had ever been. She grew distant, no longer responding when spoken to, her eyes always fixed toward the woods beyond the frosted glass. She whispered less often, but when she did, it was always the same phrase, "Don't let them take me." I asked her daughter if she'd ever heard Marie talk this way before, but she just shook her head and admitted that since moving to the house, even she had started to feel watched. Then, one stormy night, something changed. I was alone with Marie. Her daughter had gone into town to run errands before the weather worsened. Sometime after midnight, the wind began howling outside, and I heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, pacing the hallway. Thinking Marie had wandered again, I rushed out of my room only to find her still in bed, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling. Then the footsteps started again, this time from the opposite end of the house. Heavy, wet. I moved cautiously through the hall, heart pounding until I reached the living room and froze. The front door was open, just slightly, but enough to let in cold air and the scent of damp pine. I slammed it shut and locked it, trying to calm myself. But then came a sound from the kitchen, giggling, except Marie was still in bed, and that laugh wasn't hers. I crept toward the kitchen, each step feeling heavier, like something didn't want me to get closer. Through the doorway I could see the kitchen window fogged with condensation, and in the center of it a handprint, fresh, pressed against the glass from the outside. Fingers long, too long, splayed like something testing the boundary. As I stared, the porch light flickered on. No movement triggered it. That's when I saw it. A pale figure, just beyond the edge of the woods, standing still, watching the house. No face, no clothes, just shape and darkness. And though I couldn't hear it, I could feel it laughing, not loud, not joyful, but satisfied, like it had already won something I hadn't realized was being taken. Marie passed away 2 weeks later. Peacefully, the doctor said. Quietly in her sleep. But I don't think it was peaceful. Not really. In her final days, she hardly spoke, barely ate, and refused to look toward the window. The house grew cold, not in temperature, but in presence. Something had shifted. Her daughter and I both felt it. After the funeral, while sorting through Marie's belongings, I found an old photograph tucked in the back of a jewelry box. It showed a younger Marie standing in front of the same house decades ago, her mother beside her. Behind them, barely visible in the background, was a shadow in the trees, a shape that mirrored the one I saw that night. I said nothing, just slipped the photo back where I found it. We moved Marie's things out shortly after, and her daughter decided to sell the house. I haven't been back since. But sometimes when the wind howls at night or I pass an empty window, I think of Marie standing barefoot in the snow, smiling at nothing. And I wonder if the woods ever really stopped calling her, or if they just finally brought her home. Thank you for venturing into the darkness with us. If these stories sent chills down your spine, don't keep the fear to yourself. Leave a comment, smash that like button, and share this video with someone who dares to listen in the dark. We release terrifying true stories every week, so be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss what's lurking in the shadows. This is High Scare Stories, where nightmares don't end when the video does. Until next time, stay safe and stay scared.